Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Learning Tech Talks, where I am living at the intersection of business technology and the human experience. And you may have noticed there's a different title and a different guest. I know, look at that face. That is not the face that was on the teaser for what was coming up today. But you know what? In the spirit of going live, I am living on the edge of agility. So when things were like, well, it's looking like things are going to take a pivot, JD has always been so kind in the past to say, if you ever need someone, I don't know, JD, though, you've ever said it as well as Matthew Daniel, who one time when I asked, does anybody want to go live last minute? Matthew was like, I'll be your Huckleberry. That one's still in the history of Learning Tech Talks was the best response I ever got to. Hey, I have a last minute shift. Does anybody want to join me on the show? No quips from you today.
I'm not cool enough to quote Tombstone. Like there's no situation where, yeah, you're a daisy if you do. That's what I'll say. But I was gonna start with, there's nothing I could say that would top what Matthew Daniel says, and then you quote Val Kilmer on me, and I'm just like, no, I couldn't get there.
That's still best one, but I am so appreciative of you joining me on this. And we're actually going to stick to a similar topic to what I was going to talk about today, which is actually why it worked out that JD was available, because AI is all the rage. It's everywhere. Everyone's talking. I know, it's like, I feel it. I feel it in the air, JD. It's in my spin drift that I'm drinking right now. But what it's not always, when we're talking about it, it's not always talked about in terms of, well, yeah, but how is it affecting our frontline workers, which is such a huge percentage of the workforce. So I'm looking forward to having that conversation. For those who may not know you, I don't know anybody in our industry who doesn't know you, but my audience has grown as I've kind of spread outside just the L&D tech space. So for those who may be going, man, this JD guy you're talking to, you talk as though you go way back, which we do, but who is JD? How do you answer that question?
Well, Chris, it's a really complicated question that I don't really know how I can summarize my contributions to
That's
the
a very
industry
subtle plug.
in a way that people may
plug.
benefit. But no, so by day, I'm the CLO of Exonify, learning technology company that focuses on enabling frontline workers. There it is. I also wrote a book. So if you're curious about the book, jdwroteabook.com. I think it's the best book website in the learning and development space.
It's in my top drawer. Did I surprise you with that? Were you expecting me to pull that out of my top drawer?
No, not at all. Although
that was not scripted.
It is a step behind John Hinchliffe, who has racks of books behind him when he's on camera. Okay. And so I sent him a copy in England just because if anything, this book stands out on a shelf.
It certainly does. It makes me want to put back on my like Asics tracksuit from when I was in my early teen days.
No, it's actually really timely in terms of the cover of the book, because now I'm just saying it's a Barbie tie-in. Like, just totally planned.
You know what they say though, things come full circle.
If you're just way into pink, this is the pinkest book spine
that is
you could possibly acquire. The Barbie novelization isn't as pink as this book. So
that is so funny.
Long story short, I refer to my careers as kind of living a frontline focused career. So I started off managing movie theaters and theme parks. I live in Orlando, Florida. So that obviously means I used to work for the Walt Disney Company. I transitioned to learning and development during my time at Disney. Spent some time in the higher education space with Kaplan before I went to the technology side of the world 7.5 or so years ago at this point with Exonify. So I've been an operational practitioner, learning and development practitioner. Now I'm a technology practitioner. But the common thread of my entire career is I've always been
that's it.
In support of frontline workers.
Well, and I think that's I appreciate the call out to that, because I think sometimes you look at people's CVs if you're on the other side of the pond, or resumes if you're over here, and it can look like, well, that's a very diverse background that you have, and it's like it is, yet there's that common thread of frontline. And I always appreciate the light you continue shining on that, because too often when we talk about work, or when the conversation goes to work, it's talking about a small segment of the population and vastly overlooking the much more sizable population who's actually carrying a lot of that work.
It's only 80% of the global workforce.
Yeah, it's only only 8 in 10 of people is who we're talking about here. So, okay. So with this one, because I am curious how you're responding to some of the hype and some of the things around artificial intelligence right now. Because for me, it was interesting watching what happened this year as the world just blew up and people started talking about artificial intelligence as though it was the newest and most novel thing that has ever hit the market, which it is not. But there have been some highly disruptive changes. And I think a lot of things have gone mainstream that, have changed things. But what's it been like from your vantage point, especially with that frontline lens?
It's an interesting time as someone who, one, I regularly engages with the professional community, right? So I do a lot of writing, I do a lot of speaking. I'm trying to maintain relevance when it comes to the types of things that I talk about and what I believe to be true in terms of how you effectively enable a team. I published a book at the end of last year, right after ChatGPT happened. So there's been kind of that piece just as a professional who's trying to be helpful in the professional community to not just slap AI on the side of everything you do. But
which is what a lot of things feel like right now. Like conversation, it's like
always
just a normal conversation. But it's like, you know what? How can we say AI as part of this conversation to seem relevant in the news?
Can you turn on social media without being pitched a product that has something to do with AI associated to it with absolutely no proof points that it actually does what it says it does? But so there's that kind of just average, professional side of the world in terms of how is this what I believe is a paradigm shift in technology, because I think it's less about, AI can do new things. It's more about, no, this is an adjustment in how technology works in a meaningful way that's not going to be a choice. It's just going to be the way things operate, kind of like when mobile devices became ubiquitous. It just became the way technology works. It's an
inevitability. That's the way I frame it up. It's like it's not really something that we're going to choose to participate in or not participate in. It's just
as big as people say, but not nearly as exciting as people say. Like it's both of those things at the exact same time. And then on the frontline side of it, I think it's been interesting because a lot of the immediate use cases or where people jumped when it comes to generative AI in particular didn't necessarily carry a frontline message in mind. Like people talk about, I'm going to use ChatGPT as a coworker as a way to generate new ideas.
As a virtual assistant.
Right. So those types of things, it doesn't match. A lot of the conversation matches the way people like we work, but not the way a lot of people work. So if I don't work in front of a computer every day or staring at a device throughout the course of my workflow, where am I in this conversation? And I think there's two layers to that, which is one, I think the most important conversation we need to have around AI in the workplace is not how do I use AI to do what I already do more efficiently or differently or with greater value or greater scalability. That's a thing. But it starts with how is this conversation changing the nature of my organization, right? How decision makers are thinking about what work needs to be done, because maybe we're rethinking our business model. We're rethinking the way work is done, how many people we have to do different types of work, right? So there's those foundational conversations happening at executive levels to say, what does this mean for how we run our business moving forward? And then there's the second layer to that is, okay, now what's the impact on people and how they do their work and where we show up from an enablement perspective to enable this new version of work. So just simple example, if I am in retail and we change our business model or operating model within the store to say, we are now going to entirely rely on self-checkout, kind of like the Apple store, right? If you've been to an Apple store, when's the last time you went up to a cashier at an Apple store? If you buy a big expensive product, you have to interact with an employee. But if I go into the Apple store and I'm buying a case,
get an iPhone or
right, I just walk up to the product, do this, and then leave, which felt really awkward the first time. But now it just kind of became the way you do things.
The way you do it.
So if we're going to make a shift to just fundamentally change part of how work is done or how we operate, okay, well, now what do employees do? What do we need them to be capable of in this world? Are we going from a place where maybe we do have a change in the number of people we have in the store, but the bigger change might be going from, well, I need this number of people to just be able to be effective cashiers to now, no, I need those people to be capable of supporting more complex customer needs, upselling different types of products,
Yeah.
right? So
actually engaging with the customers more, things like that.
Yeah, less transactional in nature, more relationship and brand building. So how is the conversation around technology changing the way organizations function? And then as a result of that, the work people are expected to do, and then how do we properly enable that? So that's what a lot of the conversation or kind of focus for me, at least, has been this year, is kind of watching those changes and then starting to ask questions around what are ways that we can leverage this technology to enable those changes in work, or in a lot of cases, maybe close some gaps that have existed for a long time that make even more sense in terms of improving the enablement experience in the way that the work is changing.
Well, and it's the way you frame that up, I think, is important for people to consider as they think about this. Because again, sometimes even in L&D, we tend to be in this space where I would say a lot of the conversations that I'm seeing when I'm talking in the L&D segment. Now, I spend a lot of my time more broadly than just L&D, but when I'm in the L&D segment, like you said, a lot of the conversations are similar to ones you're hearing in, say, marketing or finance or things like that, where it is very much the conversations on what are the practical use cases? How are we using this to streamline our day-to-day activities? What things can we not do and have a virtual assistant take care of? And all of this, it's very tactical in nature. But where at least the conversations I'm seeing very much mirrors what you're seeing is the practical hands-on frontliners going, okay, I'm using these AI tools. That's not really what's happening. And what I'm seeing happen, at least in some of the conversations I'm having, is there is this cognitive disconnect of, I don't get what the big deal is with this whole thing, not realizing that, to your point, a lot of these conversations are still at the business level of the discussion around, okay, how does this actually affect the work and what we want to do and how we want people spending their time? And I actually recorded a video that I'm publishing today on YouTube, kind of breaking down LinkedIn's future of work report on AI. And this is where the good news for folks, because I don't know if you see this, but I still see a fair amount of fear. Mm-hmm. There's a fair amount of adoption I see on the corporate side, because again, the conversations are, hey, I'm excited. This is something I can practically see. I used to have to do this. Now I don't have to do it anymore. The fear still remains, I see largely in the front lines, because it's one of those, who's making decisions about what my job looks like? And do I have a role in that and what's coming? And I think I was encouraged by some of the numbers in there that showed, which I would agree based on the conversations I have, very few senior leaders or senior executives are going, we're going to cut back on people. Are those conversations at least happening? Maybe. But I think more of them are around, well, are we going to change what these people are doing? Not necessarily looking at reducing the number of folks involved in things. Where their time is spent is changing.
Yeah, I mean, the big question is, how often do you involve your frontline workforce in technology decisions that directly impact them? The unfortunate reality is not often. So there's still a lot of question marks around, well, one, are people talking about it at all because they're just trying to do their jobs and they're struggling to do that in a lot of cases out the gate. Maybe they're hearing things or they're seeing adjustments made, but the question then becomes, how is this impacting me? And what am I going to do? Not just am I going to have a job, but how is it going to change what I've done or maybe what I've done for a long time in my workplace? Is it going to disrupt kind of the stability that I have found within my workplace? So I think, it's a similar conversation to a lot of other discussions around frontline workers, which is how do you involve them so they don't feel like work is something that's done to them. It feels like something I'm participating in.
They're involved,
and that's not unique to frontline employees. That's every employee.
No, it happens. It happens everywhere where people feel like they're just handed the change, and it's like, hey, here's what we decided.
And the challenge with frontline workers is usually so concrete that it comes down to simple things like, well, you can't email them. So you can email your entire corporate workforce and say, here's the deal, feedback, reply. The frontline workforce is more sizable, more distributed, and more disconnected because we traditionally rely on games of telephone, right? You tell regional,
Yeah,
regional
we'll tell
tells
regional
location.
leadership. They'll go down to
Yeah.
the next line, and then
And then
hopefully at
they'll
some
tell
point it
the
reaches the
employees.
front lines, and we're hoping somebody at some point told them
Yeah. And
why
then you
and what's
didn't work
actually
that
happening.
day, so you didn't get the message, and you rely on your peer to tell you, but they forgot to tell you, so you're not involved anymore.
Or
You
they
don't.
got the details mixed up, and so what they
Yeah.
told you is wildly different than what's actually happening.
Yeah. So much of the conversation kind of comes back to some of those systemic challenges when it comes to frontline enablement. But I think this is just the most recent version that has a direct impact, especially because depending on use case, because you talk about frontline employee as this kind of broad category, but then you drill into, okay, what types of work are we talking about? And the conversation around how AI and technology is evolving to impact the way work is done in a fast food restaurant versus a retail store versus a contact center versus a manufacturing facility. We're having different conversations, and they've all been on different kind of transformation curves when it comes to the impact of technology, especially the last couple of years, because for the last 3 years, it's been difficult to staff frontline roles.
Yeah, even getting people into those jobs has been hard enough.
So technology has been less of a replace the workforce conversation and more of a we don't have a workforce conversation. So we need technology to fill gaps that we can't fill otherwise. And you saw that a lot. Retail is an example, going to self-checkout, right?
Yeah.
You just couldn't.
We can't find people, so we'll use technology to do
that
it.
enhancement.
We need
but now,
because otherwise we're closing the store.
Yeah. So I think you're a little bit, frontline work always deals with large numbers of turnover or high levels of turnover. You still see that. That's not going away. I'd say certain lines of business and certain industries are more stabilized today than they were even a year ago. But then there are certain parts of the workforce, like truck drivers, professional nurses, right? Those places that are highly skilled, highly credentialed frontline work that are still having a hard time and are getting worse in certain cases because they just can't hire anyone off the street to fill these types of jobs.
They actually have to pull from a
development.
limited talent pool to be able to fill the
Yeah.
spots.
Yeah. So there's still gaps. I mean, that also includes hospitality, back of house food service. Like there are certain parts of the workforce that are still struggling to staff at any level, yet alone, deal with standard retention. So I think the technology conversation has been meaningful for the last couple of years to help resolve some of that. But it's also helped push us to a point where we're now having conversations about how technology can enable and improve experiences for frontline workers. Because again, like the simple thing to say 3 years ago, when furloughs were happening, right? And huge changes in process and the work environment, communicating those changes and involving the frontline workforce was just a logistical problem, right? You could not reach.
You had no way to get in touch with these
talk
people.
to them, right? Especially if they didn't come to work, how are you going to get to them, right? Are we doing giant text message chains and things like that? So those types of problems have been a focus for the last couple of years because we just needed to close some fundamental gaps in the frontline experience so that we could bring people along on the journey, drive consistency, drive timely updates. Now the question becomes, can we leverage some of those mechanics and some of those tools to help people understand how their jobs may continue to evolve?
So let's
leverage their insights.
Spend some time on this. I want to spend some time on this before we dig into, because I was going to dig into and curious your take on how you're seeing AI start to affect the change in some of these jobs. But before we do, I think one of the things that's important to lay the framework on that you've started to hit on is an important one, which is there's a lot of consistency. And that's where sometimes I struggle is I get a little frustrated when I hear conversations as though everything is new under the sun because of AI. And it's like, no, actually it's not. Like a lot of the things that we're wrestling through, a lot of the things we're dealing with, we needed to be dealing with before. We have been wrestling with before. There's just a new lens by which we're now having to look at these things. So some of the gaps that we had that I remember our last conversation about this was one, you had all these logistical things, which in some ways I think, we're starting to move past because people are to some degree returning to work and we've had some time to work through it, but you still have this one where I can't remember how you worded it, but you were like, if the job sucks, you're not going to be able to find people to fill it. Like that's just as simple as if the job is terrible, that is contributing to why you can't fill it. Are you seeing meaningful progress being made in some of those areas, like the ability to connect and communicate, collaborate with frontline workers, making the jobs better, even absent AI of, hey, you know what, we need to think about these jobs, or we need to think about the way we take care of these people, because if the job's horrible, nobody's going to want to work in it anyway.
I would definitely say there's a greater recognition of that factor, because I think there's a lot less being taken for granted in terms of course, there will be people who want to fill these jobs, and of course, we'll be able to hire them when we need
Okay.
to bump up our seasonal
So that's
workforce.
good. So that mindset, that shift, because that was a
Yeah.
very prevalent, and I still occasionally see it, but I was curious if you're seeing some of that erode a bit, where people are going, no, we actually have to care. This is a huge part of our population, and we need to make the job meaningful.
Yeah, recognition, yes. It's going to take time, right? It's not a change that happens overnight, and it's also a
Okay.
change that involves the entire organization, because it's definitely not something L&D can just decide or HR can
No,
decide,
it's
right?
not.
It's an operational conversation and a partnership between people who are really focused on enablement and engagement and those types of factors and have those insights, and people who manage the work. And the one factor that comes back over and over and over again, and I can attest to this, having been a frontline employee, having worked with and managed frontline teams, and then being on the enablement side of the world, we're having more and more conversations about managers, because so much of this and so much of the work experience is shaped around that manager, because they are the workplace for a lot of employees, right? They don't see
Yeah.
people don't see the corporate team. They see the store manager or the team manager.
Yeah.
They see
That's their
those
world.
people, schedule them, prioritize them, assign them, pay them, right? This is the person who kind of represents the organization.
Yeah. They control, and in many regards, control the
Yeah.
overall experience of
Yeah.
that employee.
And they've been hit for 3 years with just an unrelenting pile of change and priorities and difficulties. And so I think there was already a question mark around kind of the consistent enablement and how we make sure people have good managers, for lack of a better term, right? That was a standing question for a long time. And now it's become a question of, well, even the great managers are burned out. Especially the great managers are burned out, right?
Yeah. If
So
anything, I was just going to say, if anything, the managers I know who are going above and beyond and doing
yeah,
what great managers do are the ones who are like, I don't know how much longer I can sustain this
yeah.
pace. It's
And I told a
brutal.
story about a retail manager that we've met who, she became the manager of her store, and becoming the manager of that store changed her life, because she now, had the earning potential to take care of herself and her family. She loves what she does. She loves her team, and she's that manager who brings in food every Friday, right, for the team. Like, she loves
She's
everything
that.
about what she does.
Yeah.
But she's been so burdened for the last couple of years, especially, that she's starting to question the love for what she does, not because of what she does, but because of her ability to maintain this type of pace, this number of
Yeah.
hours. And
Is it
that's,
sustainable?
yeah, that's where it comes back to. So the managers are the linchpin, but they're not going to do it themselves. It's the
No.
corporate team who needs to give the managers permission. And by permission, I mean resources, training, priorities, tools, so that they can focus on the right things,
Yep.
because they are like kind of the lifeblood of a frontline operation, regardless of what industry you're in. So that's been kind of a shift in conversation and tone. I think you see when you just watch publications and conversations in our industry, there's been a noticeable jump in conversations, not about leadership development. It's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about
Manager
manager
development.
enablement and what it means to take care of that part of the workforce, the middle management layer, so they can in turn take care of the frontline workforce who's dealing directly with customers every day. And it's that puzzle that I think we need to figure out if we want to,
Okay.
bring anyone else along the journey and transform the way work is done and really take advantage of. And again, that's where I think AI plays a role,
Oh, yeah.
because there's interesting new things we can do now when it comes to either streamlining the workflow of a manager, get them out of the mix so that they
Yep.
don't have to be the middle person for everything. We don't have to rely on them for literally everything.
Yeah.
Just kind of change their world so that they can focus on the right types of things. So it's one of the use
Well, and the
cases around
thing
AI
is,
I'm most interested in.
well, yeah, well, and it's so, to summarize what I'm hearing you say is, one, there is this greater recognition that, hey, the way we treat and think about our frontline workers that mindset is changing. The actual work, obviously, all that stuff has a much longer tail. You can say, okay, I get it. I want to do something. Just like you can wake up one day and go, I want to, get in shape.
Yeah.
You don't on Wednesday go, hey, check it out. Like I'm there. It's a long process to go through that. So that mirrors some of the things that I'm seeing in conversations with that. But I think the other point you call out, that's I think a good one, is the recognition that what leaders or frontline managers, I had this conversation with Ben Brooks the other day, that this whole calling people leaders, but really what we mean is managers, it just is so prevalent that it's like, well, anyway.
I could do hours on that terminology.
Well, and to the point, we tell everybody, sorry, this is a bit of a sidebar, but we tell everybody in companies, we want you to be leaders. But then when we say the word leaders, we're actually only referring to a very small percentage of the population. Yet we want everyone to behave in that. And it drives me bonkers because I'm like, well, if everybody's a leader, then let's treat everybody like a leader. And then if we're talking about the unique needs of, like you said, enablement for managers, then let's focus on that. Yeah. But that's another area that I'm encouraged that I am seeing less and less of the traditional, hey, we need to do traditional leadership development for managers. It really is more, no, how are we actually going to change the way they spend their time and what they're working on so that they can focus on more of that human interaction, the development, the growth of their teams.
I'm reading this book, and on page 95 of this book, there's a chart that compares managers and leaders, because on LinkedIn you always see those charts.
Oh yeah, you always see the one. It always gets a bajillion likes because that kind of stuff just always
and this one, I think potentially the greatest comparison point ever made in such a chart is in this book, which says managers refuse to believe a hot dog is a sandwich, but a leader is open to reconsidering the nature of hot dogs. That's the thing. It's actually in this book. Plug.
I like that. It's very fitting to whoever that author is a very witty, clever person who, but it's true in that, but to your point, I am seeing less of and I think this is where, again, the conversation shifting even in terms of L&D, that there's less of this idea of we need to do more pithy, fluffy leadership stuff and more, hey, how are we actually making it possible for our managers to do the things they need to do well, and less of this stuff. And the implications of AI are really good for stuff like logistical planning and some of this other stuff that honestly suck a ton of time out of managers' schedules. So they're never able to actually be out there and be around their people.
I'm always surprised, because I've been back of house for a while, right? Both going into learning and development. But when I was an L&D practitioner, I always made the effort to go back front of house. So at Disney, that literally meant putting on a costume and going back into the operation and just completing shifts next to people who did the job every day to make sure I stayed grounded and understood what the experience was like. So I wasn't saying one thing and they were experiencing another. Contact center, same type of thing. Although I never took a call in a contact center because you don't want me to. But I sidejacked into
I can't imagine
conversations
why.
So I could hear. I could not sell anything over the phone. Don't make me try. If you're upset about your cable service, you don't want me on the other side because I'm gonna be like, yeah, right. Like I just don't have the ability.
No kidding. You know what? Why don't we cancel your service?
Customer service, I'm really good at. I've been yelled at everything you can imagine being yelled at for as a customer service manager, but telephone interaction is not my thing. So now being back of house as a technology provider, I don't get to do the job every day. I don't have the same kind of outlet, but I plug into conversations. I do everything from I read subreddits of frontline workers who work in different places, and I know it's not reflective of an entire population, but it shows me certain things. And then I have conversations with different organizations we work with. I visit different organizations. And the thing I'm always most surprised about is how similar it feels to my experience, because I just kind of assume that I haven't been a frontline operations manager for over 10 years. And I would think it'd be very different today. And by and large, it's not, because so much of it is grounded in these kind of realities of making informed decisions, building relationships, fostering trust. Like it's such a kind of common human experience in terms of trying to manage a business while simultaneously taking care of a team,
Yeah.
it's very similar to what my personal experience was in that regard. And I think it's, so many of the challenges I see relate to where I had to spend my time. Like I spent an inordinate amount of time with digital scheduling tools, tweaking schedules to try to get them where I needed to get them.
Yep.
Or the process or the workflow around shifting time or approving time. Like these kind of administrative elements of my job. It was the admin that made me work 70 hours a week.
Yeah.
I didn't spend 70 hours with the team or the customers. I spent the 45 front facing with customers and with my team members. And then the rest of
else
it
is just the
was that
logistical administrivia.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier, where in a lot of this, we're acting like everything's changing, and yet so little is changing. I mean, the table stakes of what goes into the work we do really is very similar. And I think I'm seeing some of this stuff in the details of, some of the work I'm doing, but also I'm seeing it in some of the research of like, well, what are the things that are bubbling to the surface right now? Well, are we really surprised that interpersonal skills are more important than they've ever been? Like
creative thinking and problem solving.
Wow, creative thinking, problem solving, being able to interact with other people is
delegation.
Super important. Like, of course it is. But again, it's almost like a novelty in some ways where people are going, hey, did you know? It's like, well, yeah, that hasn't changed.
I do think we're paving the way because we're still early.
You shouldn't have hit mute and unmute. You totally went domo arigato there for a second. We lost you. Right when you were about to say something real. Yeah, you're back now.
Back?
But you were I was so excited. I'm like, here he goes. Oh, and then I lost you. And then I lost you again. JD. We got to get you off this AOL and this Juno. I have to say, you're back now.
Back?
If you need a new AOL disk, I can send you one.
That'd be amazing if you just had a stack of AOL disks. I even prioritize.
You know what? They're right next to your book. They're right next to your book.
It's a good place for them
AOL and Juno disks.
Let's see if we
what
hold.
Were you saying?
Maybe because I was about to talk about technology. Technology's like, no, he shall not say this thing.
I'm stopping. Yeah, the algos are watching.
So I do think we're at a meaningful inflection point in terms of how technology is going to impact the work is done. But I do think there are also, especially when it comes to the frontline workforce, there are these longstanding issues that this pivot in technology is going to meaningfully enable us to go after that we've just been dealing with for a long time. Let's take a simple one. Language translation. Right? That has been an expensive, time-consuming problem.
Yeah.
Not just for learning and development, for everybody. Right?
For everybody. This wasn't an L&D problem.
We are seeing a leap. It's not perfect yet by any means, but it's much better than where we once were, and in almost a scary kind of way, where when we're building digital assistants and these types of tools, they just can speak multiple languages, right? It's not like where we once came from in terms of having to prepare and upload and do a lot of background work. There's a lot of tuning that has to happen, but there's surprises. I remember some of the work my team was doing. We built a large language model in 2018-19 that was building assessment questions because we do a lot of question-based learning. So we built a tool that helps you build.
Now you're killing me, JD, because you were building a tool that helps you build, and then I lost you. And now I'm really curious where you're going to go with this. So what's funny is I think you can actually hear me when I lose you, but anyway,
I don't know.
Now you're back. You were building a tool.
StreamYard too.
Actually, you know what? We're actually going to play it off, JD. This was all intentional. It's all for the buildup.
Yeah, we're in this great place
cutting
with tech,
your feed,
but simple things won't work.
I'm doing it just to build for the buildup. We're
building this tool that helps you write questions, because in my opinion, by the end of this year, no instructional designer should have to write a multiple choice question ever again. Like, we have to improve, but there are tools that can do that and do it substantially well now. So we're building this tool. And one of the cool things it does is it automatically generates distractors, right? So that's one of the hardest parts of writing a multiple choice question is writing realistic distractors.
Right.
And we were just
It
playing
isn't
around.
these like blatantly obvious, hey, here's the
here's the right answer. Here's blatantly wrong answers. So we were playing around with this tool and feeding it different types of content. And we fed it some information associated to Harry Potter just to see what it would do, right? If it could write a question about this topic. And I don't know Harry Potter very well, but I'm told that there's language translation that happens in Harry Potter where spells and whatnot are cast in different terminology. And the large language model translated the content into the appropriate language without instruction. Like we didn't tell it to, we didn't know it could, right? It was one of those. But again, when you connect the dots of what a large language model does, of course it can, based on its training data, connect the dots and basically, autocomplete its way through that being a logical response. And then when we translated the content backwards, it was like, oh no, it did that. It didn't pull like quotes from anywhere. It translated.
No, it literally took all of that, had learned it, and then came up with its own unique things based on it.
Yeah. So it was one of those moments where it was kind of like that. Oh, that's interesting type of in the testing world, right? Not in the release world, but in the testing world.
Yeah.
So I think it just demonstrates, the fact that we're now with the tech we have right now, yet alone where it's going to be a year from now, able to go after meaningful problem like equity in the workplace, especially in a workplace where you don't know how many people in your frontline workforce have different language preferences, right? You just don't know.
No, you don't.
So you usually
and largely it's not been anything anybody has. And I think this is why, similar to, I'm encouraged by the capacity, if used right, this is going to free up. And this is where when I hear the doomsday stuff of, oh, the end of this coming, I'm like, it's only coming if you literally are only limiting in your thinking of the things that you're doing right now. If you're thinking about the things that you could do, that you'd like to do, that you never have time to do, the possibilities are absolutely endless. Because in the past, it was like, well, I could think about the potential language implications of my team, but what am I going to do about it?
It's a really expensive, complicated problem. And I'm one of those people who in the past have had to make a decision to say, well, we'll translate our content to these 3 languages because we know they're the most common preferred languages, but who am I leaving out? And that's often the challenge when it comes to enabling a large distributed workforce is it's just a math problem of how many people do you have to leave out? Because it's difficult at scale to personalize support. And that's where tech has been changing the game and is now meaningfully changing it. And translation's one great place where, why should we have to limit it? Why should it just be up to the employee, how they prefer to experience the workplace when it comes to language preference? Another one that I'm super excited about is reading level.
Yeah.
Right? Because you may have operating procedure documentation that's written for a lawyer.
That is written for someone who does not understand it at
and
all.
it's no fault of their own. They may just not read complex language, or maybe again, it's a combination of reading comprehension and language, maybe on top of it. So the interesting thing about large language models is that they can tune to someone's reading comprehension level. So you can say, maybe the documentation has to be written a certain way, because it's for regulators and written by
for legal purposes. And
and
again, we've all, I don't, anybody listening or watching has probably been through there where you get the thing approved by legal.
Yeah.
And you're like, I'm not touching it. We're not touching it.
This is biblical in that way. But then this
has been moved into the corporate canon.
Yeah.
It's in the canon now. We are not messing with this thing.
Right. That is exactly how Spider-Man did that. And everyone will argue about it for the rest of time. So, but on the frontline context, I need to use this information to solve a problem, a real problem, to help a customer, keep myself safe, do the right thing, be compliant, all these different types of things. So now we can put AI between that documentation and the employee and say, answer the person's question in terms of how they would apply this information, but answer it in a way that's most comfortable to them, so that it's still accurate, it's still compliant, but it's just adjusted so that they can use that information correctly. So it's that type of capability.
I want to unpack this one because I agree with you in the sense that this to me these are 2 really great examples of where historically it wasn't like diabolical people were sitting in a back room going, haha, we're not going to do this because we don't care about people. It was just a math game of going, I'm sorry, we've got to keep the legal and the regulators at bay.
And no one's giving me all of the time and money.
Right. There will be no, So we've got that one. And so, you know, gosh, this is giving me nightmares back to my quality control days where, right, you spent the days in these documents going, no human being reads this and understands what is being described whatsoever. You're just literally going, oh my gosh. And then there's the risk, and I see this from the friends of mine in the compliance world who go, yeah, but how do we trust AI to translate that well? Or when it's getting things like, how would you do? And it's a fair question, but my position back is always, right, but it's happening today. They're just doing it with their peers. Like this idea that, well, this doesn't happen. You really think people who they don't understand, what are the options when they don't understand? They either guess, which you want them guessing, or they ask someone else, and you're now banking that that other person is getting it right. And you're somehow comfortable with the legal or compliance risk with those two options. But the idea of a extremely powerful AI algorithm basically digesting this and going, yeah, I get the gist of what this is saying, and I'm going to tune it back to you in a meaningful way. But it's a legitimate risk. And are you seeing organizations have to wrestle through some of the ethical implications or legal implications of that?
Everyone does, right? It doesn't matter if you're a technology company, if you're a business in literally any industry. These are the types of questions we need to be asking around the effective application of this technology, because you know, the reality is if you use a generative AI tool right now in your work and you're using it to generate ideas, one, if you're a domain expert, you know when information comes back and it's not accurate. You can
catch it real quick.
You mitigate,
you're like, that's
yourself.
Not even close.
Right? But if you're asking very concrete questions about your job that has safety considerations or any risks associated to it, it's different in terms of the expectation of reliability and that type of factor. So that's why that's the work that's being done now, is to figure out how do we properly apply this type of technology to help people solve the right problems and also draw certain types of lines and guardrails around different types of things. Because
and it just gets really challenging. And this is where I enjoy these. I enjoy wrestling through some of these because it is one of those, it's a tough area to navigate. And for the most part, this is some of the new uncharted territory that I do think a lot of organizations are wading into right now, where they're going, okay, so if the chatbot gives this response or it, digests this and gives this, well, now we have something that is, documented that the system told our people to say this, which is in direct violation of what the policy is, because AI, and for whatever reason, and I think this is the part that's going to be interesting to watch over the next few years, we're comfortable with people making mistakes. Like, oh, JD, he just misunderstood and he gave you that wasn't the right thing. And it's like, well, we'll give you a little bit of coaching and then we'll move on type of a thing. But when AI gives the wrong thing, there's like zero tolerance for it. At least at this stage, that's a lot of the reactions I see right now. Is like, no, it made a mistake. It's wrong. And it's like,
it's not the self-driving car
all the time.
It's not the self-driving car problem, but there's similarities, right? Where if self-driving cars would actually help us have less accidents, would we lean in? Or is there something about that lack of control?
Well, and it is a very similar situation where you see that, where people go, well, if you look down at something in your dash or in your center console and look up and rear end somebody, mistakes happen type of a thing. But if AI made the same mistake, we'd be like, ban self-driving cars.
Accountability, right? Like, where's the accountability lie? Who's ultimately responsible for that decision? Was it a programmer who ultimately made a decision that caused that to happen versus the person that's in the car? I don't work on self-driving cars. I don't deal with the full complexity. I just know that if I called for a vehicle and it pulled up and there was no human being in that vehicle, I'm not sure if I get in that vehicle.
You wouldn't.
But
You
I get in a
wouldn't?
vehicle with a random dude who,
Who
right? I don't know
a
your
random
driving
person
record.
you've never met, you know
Yeah.
nothing about their
Right.
driving record or anything. And that's totally see, and that's the thing. And I think these are the lines that we're having to now navigate. Because for me, I'd rather get in the car with nobody driving because I'd be like, I'm more confident in technology's ability to, know the task at hand and go, I just need to get you from point A to point B
Yeah.
and assess the risk type of a thing. But I know that's
Yeah. And I think that's the big kind of theme to pull out of this conversation is we have to kind of get beyond this idea that, oh, AI can do everything. Or you're going to use, the results that you're going to get back from an AI tool are going to be equal in terms of quality and reliability for literally everything that you could possibly imagine. It's going to write just as good a poem as it is as a Drake song, as it is a standard operating procedure, right? And I think the key moving forward, and that's why I'm not a huge fan of, I'm not leaning as far into the prompt engineering conversation as a lot of people are, because I think the key to this is creating a world where people don't have to be expert prompt engineers, right? Imagine if you had to be exceptionally good at using Google to use Google to find anything that you need. The trick is that the tech has to be tuned to solve very specific problems and get really good at solving very specific problems so that you, as the user of that technology, don't have to be an expert at the technology. You're an expert at doing the job using the technology.
true.
So that's where, it's unrealistic to say, oh, we're solving every problem and doing everything. But the better way to look at it is this tool is going to help this part of the workforce solve these very meaningful problems in a very meaneful way.
That they can focus on these other things. Because even going back to the Frontline example, right? We said we were talking about front lines, but we'll bring it back to this. Well, I guess honestly, the car driving one is a good example of that. Where the more, even as you were talking, I was reflecting on it and, I was like, you know what? Actually, I would be most confident in a car that was a self-driving car that had a driver behind it who was qualified to do it, who was there to override any potential decisions that the car made that they were like, hey, you know what? Nah, this is not the best path.
I get it.
That would actually be the ultimate, which I think that's where we're going to see work start to go, going back to the, is the idea of a complete self-checkout world terrifying to some people? Maybe. But when you really think about it, a large majority of the transactions are eating up a lot of people's times that would be better spent getting to know the customers, doing different things. When things aren't working, that you have someone there. I personally know for a fact, I hate going to stores where there's only self-checkout and there's not anybody there. I don't use the self-checkout because I go, if something goes wrong, I'm screwed.
Can you guess what percentage of retail transactions take place at a self-checkout today? What percentage would you guess?
I'm guessing it's a lot lower than most people would think. So I'm going to say 20%.
Half.
Okay.
So it is not
higher than I would have guessed.
I believe, don't quote me, but I believe the revenue split. So in terms of dollars spent in terms of transactions, full service versus checkout, the revenue split leans 20 or 30% higher to the full service because you take larger, more complicated orders.
So that makes sense though, when you think about it, because if you're just getting a pack of gum and you grabbed something from the back, I don't want to wait in line and deal with somebody because I ran in, I'm trying to just get a thing and get out of the store. Yeah. If I got a shopping cart loaded with stuff, I don't want to have to take care of that and deal with the complexity of it.
Well, what's interesting is, so if we live in the self-checkout example, what we see are a couple different things happening in terms of, technology is impacting the way the business operates and the way work is done. And then there's a secondary effect to what people need to be capable of doing. So there's the person or persons monitoring self-checkout, right? That is a different job than being a cashier, being able to effectively work across multiple customers, do it in a way that meets the promise of how quickly I'm supposed to get out of here via self-checkout, fix machinery, because sometimes the register breaks. So there's a bunch of different things happening there that
it's a different job.
Different skills.
And by the way, to the folks that self-checkout, people making decisions around that, there's nothing worse than the oversight from the self-checkout person who actually doesn't have the authority to do the stuff, and they have to call for
Override, and they
someone
got to
else
call
to
somebody.
do it, right? It's like,
Yeah.
oh no, I got to call. And you're like,
Age
I just
restricted
want to get
sales
out of the
items.
store.
Yeah, that
Which
type of
again,
stuff.
it's a different job than the person who's just checking people out.
And in retail right now, the most discussed topic is theft. So there's another layer to what that person represents in terms
They're
of
also
making
watching
sure
out to make sure.
with loss prevention in a lot of cases, right? So they play a different role. Now flip to the cashier, who's still at the full service lane. We see in different parts of the world, there's shifts happening in terms of the role that that person plays. As an example, there's a grocery chain in Europe who installed slow lanes. So they have the self-checkout, but then they have purposeful lanes where people who want to roll through and have a conversation, because this might be their social time, right? Some people go to the grocery store.
They
the
literally have slow lanes.
So
like
they built
it's
slow
literally
lanes
called that.
so that the cashier has permission to have the conversation. You know, you're getting in that line. That's what this line is for. But that person now has to be.
You're going to wait. You're probably going to even be having conversations with other people in the line because
we're rolling through because it's social.
That's the point. You
right?
go here to engage with the people who are also shopping.
That's a customer service offering this company finds valuable. So that employee now has to be capable of that. You can't put someone
it's a different skill
on the slow lane that can't have a good conversation or isn't interested in having that conversation.
Who just wants to get the stuff. What's hilarious? I know you're going to continue going on this.
Yeah.
But what I love about this is it is firsthand illustrating how the skill diversity of what may seem like just this, oh, well, we just have checkout cashiers.
Nope.
You
have different types now.
You
right?
have different types of checkout cashiers, which have different skill sets that you could even build a talent mobility structure into just checkout structures.
There's potentially different pay. I don't know if this is true. I'm just making this up, but there might be different pay grades associated with the skills required to do these different roles. And maybe in the past,
I absolutely think there would be different pay grades based on the skill set that we're talking about. That from an HR discussion, I would say, you would then potentially graduate to some of these other cashiers.
Yeah. So you might have gone from a world, again, making up the numbers. Maybe before you had to staff 6 front-end cashiers. Maybe now you have to staff 4 front-end employees. But those 4 front-end employees have to be more capable in different areas. And then as a manager, you have to ensure kind of the cross-skilling capability so that, let's say that I don't know of one particular store that has this combination, but maybe you work in a world now where someone calls in sick and that person was going to be the person designated to the slow lane. Well, can you pull the person from self-checkout to man that slow lane? Because you don't want to close it because people might come to the store today and be disappointed that they don't have that offering, and they may try another store next time that offers that more social interaction.
Yeah.
But if you try to pull the person who does self-checkout, who's really good at speed and productivity and managing across multiple work streams, the multitasking per se, right? And you put them in the slow lane, they might not be capable of that because that's not what they're good at, not what they're
It's not what they're good at. It's not what they like doing. It's painful.
So managing your workforce as a manager changes, and that's why it's
just
so
got a lot more complicated.
It's so important for you to understand the capabilities of your people, and that's why I always talk about skills. And I'm having a conversation in a panel next week about frontline skill strategy, because skill requirements are so concrete when it comes to frontline workers. And as a manager, knowing what your people can and can't do, where their strengths are and where their opportunities are, it's not just a talent strategy thing. It's how you literally run your business every day.
Yeah.
So I think coming back to that AI conversation is AI is changing how work happens, but then it's changing the expectations of employees. And then on the other side of it, they're now it's enabling the tools that we need to help enable people in these ways so that we can get, upskilling and cross-skilling to those front-end employees to make sure that they do feel comfortable doing these different types of work. Using strategies like we talked about translation, making support more easily accessible. Adaptive learning is another big one around how we use data and technology to personalize the experience. So AI is impacting the frontline experience from all sides. And it's important for us to understand those dimensions so that we can take advantage of the tech stack that we now have available to us and point it in the right directions so that we're helping people become capable of what they need to be in this new version of work.
Well, and the thing with this, and this is where, to the decision makers in organizations, I think what we do in this moment is going to be significant, because to me, everything we just described, and I'm not even talking in terms of learning and development. Learning and development plays a key role in that. But as I think about even just the cashier situation that we talked about, the bright future that presents to people, if is significant, really, because even now, when some people may lock into the, well, you said you would only need 4 people versus 6, but if you have the right decision makers in play, you could say, correct, but if you do this right, you could build a career ladder and skill ladder within one part of the business. And now with the funds that were freed up from only needing 4 people instead of 6, if you have decision makers who really truly are concerned about being human centered, you now potentially can better support those 4, provide them more development and growth and career mobility, even in what may seem like a dead end job. And that to me is extremely exciting for organizations. And even going back to, how do you make work suck less for some of these jobs? Well, that sounds like a bright, engaging future ahead, to say, hey, you know what? You might come in and start as the manned checkout person, the person who just boop, boop, just move people through as quickly as possible. Yet you have the opportunity to say, if you build your interpersonal skills, we can do this. You can be part of the long line. You want to diversify your portfolio. You can oversee the self-checkout and have this additional responsibility. Now we're assessing these people to see, hey, who's capable of managing a store because they're able to do all of these things. It's a very bright future with what you can do in a talent pipeline with what we're describing in what used to just be, hey, we're just hiring a cashier, high turnover, there's nothing we can do, just fill the spot and move on.
And there's certain key themes that underlie when we talk to frontline employees and we ask just the simple, what do you want, right? What would make work better for you? What do you need to be successful? Certain kind of consistent key themes come through, and there's this balancing act between stability and flexibility, right? Some people lean in the direction of stability, where they say there's certain types of work I like doing. I'm comfortable there. That's what I want to do. And that's cool. There's certain people who want additional flexibility to say, if you cross train me in different positions, one, I get greater variety in my day. I might be able to pick up additional hours, and it might be a gateway to me taking on another role or trying to go after a promotion, those types of things. And that's cool too. And I think it's key to create that type of experience where you get that balance so that people can get what they want out of this experience. Because some people just want a job, and that's fine because they need to take care of themselves and their family. Some people want to develop a career. That's great too. How do we create that experience that meets both ends so we can retain and enable both workers equally? They can both do a great job, both give customers what they're looking for. And that's where I think we have a great opportunity now. And this kind of evolution of technology is giving us an opportunity to create that experience that meets both needs while enabling the type of workplace that we're creating through a similar change in technology.
And everything you said, and I think this is some of the challenging parts that we have ahead, is this is complicated, big work. I mean, what we're describing right now is not a small feat for an organization to take on. And I think that's where sometimes the conversations I have, people start to get overwhelmed because they go, I mean, that sounds great, but this sounds like a lot of work. But the possibilities to me is, one, you don't have to get there overnight, but what it can do to solve some of these big problems that organizations have been wrestling with for a very, very long time, that we in many regards have just kind of relented and said, yeah, well, that's just the way it is. And I think the exciting part about where we're going now is it doesn't have to be that way anymore. We actually can go, no, actually there is a way we could do things that formerly were impossible. But, and this goes back to the topic I originally pitched to you if we were to come on, was it requires doing more than just make slightly iterative improvements to the way work is happening today, and instead going, how do we completely rethink what it could look like?
And hopefully, if this conversation raises any interesting points, hopefully it's a demonstration in why people are correct when they say, AI is not just a technology conversation, it's a human conversation. And I think a lot of people lean to that kind of tagline right now, which is AI won't replace you. A person with AI will replace you. And I think that's a radical oversimplification of the experience that we're talking about.
It's a radical oversimplification, which I've said, by the way. But yes.
Hopefully people recognize that when we talk about anything associated to work, regardless of how we're enabling the change, it's it's a human experience, work, broadly speaking.
Yes, it is.
And if we want to retain and enable and get great performance out of a population of the workforce, regardless of who it is, frontline or otherwise, we can't just change the world around them without them being a participant. They may not be able to make the decision, right?
No.
At no point when I was a movie theater concessionist did I think the company was going to make a decision based on my opinion.
Yeah.
It's
You're going to
just
get a
not
phone
reality.
call. Hey, JD, we're really wrestling through this
But
right
I
now. What do you think?
I tried real hard, right? I was there for 6 years. I climbed through the ranks of management within that organization because I was invested in what I was doing. Did I want to run a movie theater company? No. But I liked what I was doing and I liked the people that I was supporting. So I don't expect you to take my perspective and do what I say to this business, but I do expect you to involve me, to give me a chance to convey that opinion, to answer that opinion if I do provide that feedback, and to just make it feel like I am part of the story. Because in the day-to-day, when the customers are coming through the door, I am very much a part of this conversation. I'm the one getting yelled at.
You are the story.
That movie is sold out,
that's
right?
the thing.
I'm the one who's hearing something about how high the price of popcorn is, right? I'm dealing with these realities. I am part of the story. Please keep me part of the story when those big transformations are happening. And I think we have the opportunity to do that as the workplace is changing around people. So that's what I would ask people, is to remember that while a lot of these conversations are happening in tech worlds like mine, we have to bring people along the journey so that work is something that people participate in, not something that is done to them. And right now is when we have the chance to do it. Because a year from now, I mean, look how far this conversation has come to this point since late last year. Echo that to the nth degree a year from now.
The change curve is moving exponentially.
Yeah.
So
now
I
is
think
when
that's
you start to involve people.
I think it is a great note to end on, because I think that can be a takeaway for anybody who watches or listening to it. And again, like you said, it's not about handing over the decisions or saying, you all figure this out. It's about saying, hey, how can we incorporate you into this and keep you at the center of what we're trying to do? Because ultimately, like you said, we want work to be something you participate in, not something that's handed to you. Awesome. Well, JD, I so appreciate that. I love the random book plugs we got in there too. And the fact I had yours in the top drawer, just an epic apex to the conversation. So thank you so much for making it. Thank you for making the time. Thanks to everybody who's watching and listening. And I hope you find this helpful as you continue navigating the AI journey in your organizations.